Amen. So keep your place there in Ecclesiastes chapter number 2. So we're going to be coming back to Ecclesiastes chapter number 2. That'll be our base chapter for the sermon. We're going to look at a complex topic this morning, and it's a topic that a lot of people get wrong. It's kind of the main topic of the book of Ecclesiastes. The title of the sermon is Under the Sun, or more specifically, Labor Under the Sun. So I want to talk this morning about what we spend our lives doing. So you see those two words used over and over again in the book of Ecclesiastes, under the sun, under the sun, under the sun. And that's basically, what are you spending your life on? What are you spending your life, your labor as he calls it here, doing? So we're going to look at some common misconceptions this morning, but we're going to look at, Solomon wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. If you look at chapter number 1, of Ecclesiastes, just verse number 1, it says, the words of the preacher, all right, the son of David, king in Jerusalem. So Solomon is kind of giving us some life lessons here, and a lot of these life lessons from Solomon are how not to do things, things that he realized that a wise man looking back, or you'll hear that word a lot this morning, remembrance, like looking back on your life, all right? So we're going to look at your labor under the sun this morning and do a study on this, and I want to give you some common misconceptions about Ecclesiastes and how people actually misapply a lot of this today, and you'll see this in worldly philosophies today as well. But I want to look at your labor under the sun. What do we spend our time doing, all right? Labor, that's what we're doing in our lives. That's not only just the work, but it's like, you could have, when people think of the word labor, they think about, hard work today. But it could be just whatever it is that you do all day, all week, whatever, that is your labor. Everybody has labor, whether it be good labor or bad. All right, so look at Ecclesiastes chapter number 2 and look at verse number 17, and let's get into this morning. Ecclesiastes 2:17, the Bible says, therefore, so you see, this is the end of Solomon. He says, therefore I hated life in verse number 17, because the work that is wrought under the sun, there's that under the sun, in his life is what he's saying. The work that is wrought under the sun is grievous unto me, for all is vanity and vexation of spirit. Vanity meaning self-focused or worthless. You could look at it that way too. In verse number 18, he says, yea, I hated all my labor, which I had taken under the sun, because I should leave it unto the man that shall be after me. There's a common theme as well that we'll see in the book of Ecclesiastes, and I'm going to answer that for you, why that is, why he hates his labor, and he hates it, because he's just going to leave it to the person that comes next. He's talking about whoever's going to inherit, whatever it is that he has, right? So the point is in these two verses is that Solomon talks about all the things that he had in his life at the beginning of Ecclesiastes chapter number 2, and then he looked back on his life in lamentation. He looked at all the stuff, and he's just like, somebody else is just going to get it all. And what is the point? But the point is this. Look at the hate statements there in verse number 17 and verse number 18, and we'll start to see where people get this wrong. He didn't hate the stuff. He didn't hate the things. What did he hate? He says, I hated life. He hated what he did, but then he gets more specific in verse number 18. He says, I hated all my labor. That's a strange thing. I mean, he hated his labor that he spent in his life. So the question this morning, and the title of the sermon being Labor Under the Sun, the question that I want to answer for you this morning, is labor good or bad? And I want to look at that in the Bible this morning. Labor being work or effort. Even labor could even be mental effort. Things that you think about. And Ecclesiastes even talks about that a little bit, is just, labor being things that you're stressed out about, things that bother you, things that keep you awake at night. This is labor, effort, things that you do, things that you spend your time on. Solomon hated those things in his life. He hated his labor. Turn to Ecclesiastes chapter number 5. So let's do a Bible study this morning. Let's explore this idea of labor. Is it good or is it bad? Because even in the book of Ecclesiastes itself, we get some contradictory themes or seemingly contradictory themes on labor itself. Look at verse number 18 of Ecclesiastes chapter number 5. Ecclesiastes chapter number 5 and verse number 18. So we're looking at this question of is labor good or bad as we begin this morning. Look at verse number 18 of Ecclesiastes chapter number 5. The preacher says, "Behold, that which I have seen, it is good and comely for one to eat and to drink and to enjoy the good of all his labor that he had taken under the sun all the days of his life, which God giveth him, for it is his portion." So he's saying here in Ecclesiastes 5:18 that the things that come from labor are good. Yet in chapter number 2, he talks about all the things that he accumulated and talks about how he hated the labor that got him those things. How can these two things go together? How can these two things make sense? That's what I want to get across to you this morning. Go back to Ecclesiastes chapter number 2. Yet in Ecclesiastes chapter number 2, so in Ecclesiastes 5, you have this man saying that the things that enjoy the good, a man should enjoy the good of all his labor, meaning whatever comes from that labor. Yet in Ecclesiastes chapter number 2, he's just lamenting the fact that the person that comes after him, which is going to be his own family, by the way, gets the things that come from his labor. Look at verse number 19 of Ecclesiastes chapter number 2. And he says, and I mean, it's kind of depressing, these three verses right here. He's just, "And who knoweth whether he shall be a wise man or a fool?" Talking about who's going to get the things that he has accumulated in his life. "Yet shall he have rule over all my labor wherein I have labored." He's talking about the things that have come from his labor. The next person along is going to get all of those things. "And wherein I have showed myself wise under the sun. This is also vanity, worthless." Verse 20. "Therefore I went about to cause my heart to despair of all the labor which I took under the sun." Again, he's just showing that he hates his labor. He hates how he spent his time because somebody else is going to get all the stuff that came from his labor. Look at verse 21. This is the verse of the week. "For there is a man whose labor is in wisdom and in knowledge and in equity." Here's a man that works hard his whole life, that has an honest job, that goes out and labors and gets these things. "Yet to a man that hath not labored therein shall he leave it for his portion. This is also vanity and great evil." Saying that a man that is wise, that goes out to builds a business and builds all these things and then just leaves it to somebody who has not built those things or has no idea how to be wise or anything like that, he's like, this is worthless. This is a bad thing. This is evil. This is wrong. You ever heard the statement, it takes one generation to make it, and it takes one generation to lose it? How many of you actually have seen this play out, like in a life of somebody? I remember that there was a man that I knew when I was a kid, or I knew of. I didn't know him very well personally, but he was a very wise man. This verse reminds me of him every single time I read it. He was a very wise man, had what seemed like a decent family, and he built this great business. He built this great farm. And he was a very successful farmer. He was very good at what he did. He had a lot of respect from people in the community. And then when he died sort of early compared to most people. And one of his sons got the whole thing. And his son, within 10 years, had destroyed it all. I mean, there was like animals living in the house. I mean, literally destroyed everything. Did not know how to farm, did not know how to do any business. I don't even know that this person really tried to run the business or anything. They were just kind of living off of whatever, that income was and whatever he was given. But the point is, one generation to make it, the wise man who ruled, his business with equity and wisdom and knowledge, and then hands it over to someone with no wisdom, and it's all gone. That's vanity. That's worthless. What was the point of all of that? That's what the preacher is telling us. Look at verse number 22. "For what hath man of all his labor, and of the vexation of his heart. So that vexation of his heart is talking about the first man, that first generation, where he's just stressed out, right? I mean, how many of you men have been stressed out about your job? How many of you men have had some project or something going on at work, or maybe just something going on, where you're thinking about career or whatever, and you're just stressed out, or something bad happens to the business? Look, that vexation of heart will come along with having a business, having a career, having a job, supporting your family. That's going to be there, all right? If you don't have vexation of heart, you don't care, you're not trying, all right? But he's saying, what was the point of all that first man's labor and vexation of heart if it just becomes all worthless and thrown away in the next generation? It says, wherein hath he labored under the sun? Look at verse number 23. For all his days are sorrows, and his travail grief. Yea, his heart taketh not rest in the night, and this is also vanity. He's saying this guy in Ecclesiastes chapter number 2 that pursued all these things and did all these things and just gives it away to somebody, some fool in the next generation that just throws it all away. He's stressed out. All his days are sorrows. He looks back. He has nothing but travail on his life. He has nothing but, regret and travail. All his days are sorrows. Think about that for a second. Every night he's worried, and then he literally says, I hate my labor. This man in Ecclesiastes chapter number 2. But is labor bad? According to the Ecclesiastes chapter number 2 preacher, it is bad. But Ecclesiastes chapter number 5 tells a different story. So the goal of this sermon this morning is to answer that question, which is it? Which is it? And the answer is this, it depends. It depends. Are you Ecclesiastes chapter number 2? Or are you Ecclesiastes chapter number 5? This becomes the question. Let me just give you a summary of the Ecclesiastes chapter number 2 man. Go back to Ecclesiastes chapter number 2, and let's look at a few verses here. The Ecclesiastes chapter 2 man, look, they're both the same person. We get that. We know that this is Solomon, David's son. But he's telling you the perspective and the way you can do things where your life will seem worthless, or the way you can do things where that will not be the case. It will actually be the opposite of the case. But the Ecclesiastes chapter number 2 man is someone who toils, he stresses day and night. This man is pushing to build his empire in Ecclesiastes chapter number 2. Are you in Ecclesiastes chapter number 2? Let's look at a couple verses here. And I want to point out a pattern in Ecclesiastes chapter number 2 that you will not see in the other chapters. In verse number 3, look what he says. He says, I sought in mine heart. Verse number 3. Verse number 4, I made me. Verse number 5, I made me. Verse number 6, I made me. Verse number 7, I got me. Verse number 8, I gathered me. Are we seeing a pattern here in Ecclesiastes chapter number 2? In verse number 9, he finally says, we see the point of it all, the point of gathering. I gathered me, I got me, I made me, I sought in mine heart. In verse number 9, we see the point of it all, where he says, so, he's saying, by that word so, he is saying, this is why I did all these things. He says, so I was great. So the question is when you look at Solomon, especially in Ecclesiastes chapter number 2, who's just gathering and he's just heaping up and he's getting all these things for me, for mine heart, for, and just so I could be great. Go back to 1 Kings chapter number 3. The question that you have to ask yourself, if you know anything about Solomon, is why did Solomon have to seek anything for himself? Because that's what he's doing in Ecclesiastes chapter number 2, is he is seeking all of these things for himself, for his heart. Remember the beginnings of Solomon as he takes over the kingdom from his father as a young man. And God approaches Solomon in verse number 5 of 1 Kings chapter number 3. And he says, in Gibeon the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night. And God said, ask what I shall give thee. He asks a young man, probably 18, 19 years old. What do you want? And look what Solomon says in verse number 6. And Solomon said, Thou hast showed unto thy servant David my father great mercy, according as he walked before thee in truth and in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart with thee. Thou hast kept him for this great kindness, that thou hast given him a son to sit on the throne as it is this day. So he just gives, thanks to God that he's even able to have the kingdom, that God would just allow David's, dynasty to continue through him. Verse number 7, he says, And now, O Lord my God, thou hast made thy servant king instead of David my father, and I am but a little child. I know not how to go out or come in. I think he's over-exaggerating there a little bit, and he's not obviously a 5-year-old, but he's saying, I'm just a kid, is what he's saying. And I've now got this great kingdom to rule. And look at verse number 8. Now remember the wording of Ecclesiastes chapter number 2, which is the same man later in his life, but he says, And thy servant is in the midst of thy people, which thou hast chosen, and a great people that cannot be numbered nor counted for multitude. Give therefore thy servant an understanding heart to judge thy people, that I may discern between good and bad, for who is able to judge this thy so great a people? Here Solomon is talking about, he's concerned about God's people. He's concerned that he, a child, a kid, a teenager, would be able to rule and give good judgment to God's people. So he's not concerned about himself. He's literally concerned about how he will affect these people. And the speech pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this thing. Now look at verse number 11. And if you remember the theme of Ecclesiastes chapter 5 that we just read, this will match it perfectly. And God said unto him, Because thou hast asked this thing, and hast not asked, look at this, for thyself, long life, neither hast asked riches for thyself, nor hast asked the life of thine enemies, but hast asked thyself understanding to discern judgment, behold, I've done according to thy words. Lo, I've given thee a wise and understanding heart. He's like, I'm going to give you that good judgment, so that there was none like thee before thee. He's like, I'll give you better judgment and more wisdom than anyone who has ever lived on the earth. Neither after thee shall any arise like unto thee. God is literally saying, you're going to have better judgment and more wisdom than any human being that will ever live, that has ever lived, or will ever live on the planet. And I've also given thee, look at this, verse 13. And I've also given thee. Now, don't miss verse 13, because this is where people misunderstand the theme in Ecclesiastes. And I've given also thee that which thou hast not asked, both riches and honor, that there shall be not be any among the kings like unto thee all thy days. He said, oh, by the way, all the things that you didn't ask for, I'm going to give you all those things too. He's like, you're going to be richer than any king that ever lives during your lifetime. But why was this? Why did God bless Solomon this way? He blessed him because his concern was for the people and not for himself. Now go back to Ecclesiastes chapter number 5, and you'll see exactly what God has just done in 1 Kings chapter number 3. You see how we kind of have to understand the complexities of the Bible here and what the Bible is saying? We can't just take one verse of Ecclesiastes and just run with it and be like, labor's bad, or, stuff is bad, or whatever. People could run with a lot of different wrong directions in Ecclesiastes. But look at Ecclesiastes 5, verse number 18. It says, Behold, that which I have seen, it is good and comely for one to eat and to drink, and enjoy the good of all his labor, that he have taken all this under the sun, all the days of his life. Look at this, which God giveth him, for it is his portion. And in verse number 19, it backs this up again. This matches exactly what God did in 1 Kings chapter number 3. Every man also to whom God hath given riches and wealth, and hath given him power to eat thereof, and to take his portion, and to rejoice in his labor. Is the man in Ecclesiastes chapter number 2 rejoicing in his labor? No, he is not. He is lamenting all the labor of his entire life. Ecclesiastes chapter 5 is exactly the opposite of Ecclesiastes chapter number 2. It's the same man, though. Here we are looking at the man of 1 Kings chapter number 3. That's the difference. Verse number 20. For this guy, remember that Ecclesiastes chapter number 2. You have to look at the exact comparisons of what's happening to Solomon in Ecclesiastes chapter number 2. Solomon in Ecclesiastes chapter number 2 looks back on his life in remembrance, and he does what? It's nothing but vexation and vexation of vanity and vexation of spirit his whole life. But this man, for he shall not much remember the days of his life, because God answered him in the joy of his heart. This guy is like, he just looks back with nothing but joy. Nothing but happiness. Doesn't regret anything. So 2 points on the Ecclesiastes chapter number 5 man. The 2 points I'm trying to get you to see is this. God just gave it to him. God just gave it to him in Ecclesiastes chapter number 5. See, the problem in Ecclesiastes chapter number 2 or Ecclesiastes chapter number 5, see, the problem isn't the riches or the wealth. That literally has nothing to do with it. A lot of people will look at Ecclesiastes chapter number 2 and they'll interpret it like, see, I hate rich people or whatever. You shouldn't be rich, or you shouldn't have things, or you shouldn't, you shouldn't have wealth. And look, that's a real theme in our society today, even in this world today. It's like just because somebody has wealth, people just hate them. They're just like, yeah, I hate them because, well, that guy's a billionaire. He's bad. I mean, maybe some billionaires are bad, but the point is, the riches has nothing to do with it. The riches has nothing to do with it. All the patriarchs were rich, folks. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, these were all people that you would have looked at in that point in time and been like, those people are very wealthy people. First of all, rich and poor is all relative. But the point is, all the patriarchs were what people would look at as wealthy of that time. Was David poor? Job was very wealthy. Job was wealthy, had many flocks and many livestock, lost it all, got it all back. But the point is this. This guy in Ecclesiastes chapter number 5, he just doesn't much remember. He's just happy with what God has given him. He wasn't somebody who was just pursuing all those things for himself. He's just enjoying his blessings in his life. And because of that, he doesn't have to look back and lament on the past. The Ecclesiastes chapter 2 man, though, he's looking back on his life and he's saying it was all for nothing. So what is the answer? Well, the answer is actually back in Ecclesiastes chapter number 2. So flip back there if you would. So what's the answer? Both of them, the Ecclesiastes chapter number 2 man and the Ecclesiastes chapter number 5 man, they both had stuff. I mean, if we just think of a generic person, they both had stuff, but one was wealthy and lamented his whole life, and the other was wealthy and just had no regrets in his life, just had joy and blessings from God. So what's the difference? Because it's not the stuff. It's not the stuff. Look, people, socialism, communism, these whole theories and these philosophies that have destroyed millions, hundreds of millions of people in the last hundreds of years, they're based on this idea of envying someone that has more stuff than you. And it's an evil philosophy that the Bible does not teach. Both of these men, if we look at a generic man, one's an Ecclesiastes chapter number 2 man, and one's an Ecclesiastes chapter number 5 man, both of them had wealth. Why is one miserable and why is one joyful? The answer is in Ecclesiastes 2. Look at verse number 24. It says, "There's nothing better for a man than that he should eat and drink, and that he should make his soul enjoy good in his labor." Sounds a little bit like Ecclesiastes chapter number 5 there now. "This also I saw, that it was," look at this, "from the hand of God. For who can eat, who also can hasten hereunto more than I?" Verse 26, "For God giveth to a man that is good in his sight wisdom and knowledge and joy." There's that joy that Ecclesiastes chapter number 5 man has. "But to the sinner he giveth travail, to gather and to heap up, that he may give to him that is good before God. This is also vanity and vexation of spirit. The answer is in verse 26. There's two men described there in verse number 26. The first man is a good man. That's the Ecclesiastes chapter number 5 version. And the next man they call the sinner. They both have things. But the sinner has heaped up those things to his travail. And the good man is blessed with wisdom, knowledge, and joy. So both are wealthy, and the difference is, look, the problem is not the stuff. You can look at this and you can just say, I should never save any money in my life. Should you never save money? No, that's not what the Bible says. That's not what the Bible teaches other places. And, you'll find people that look at somebody that, maybe has more than them or whatever, and they're like, oh, it's wrong to have, savings or, to save up. Should I never plan to retire or, whatever you think retirement is? Should you just spend all your money and just be broke every single week? No. That's not what the Bible teaches, and that's not what this sermon is about. But turn to Proverbs chapter 13. So we see in Proverbs 26, in Ecclesiastes 2:26, there's two men. One's a sinner, and one's what he calls a good man. They have the completely different results, though. All right? You see these same two men in Proverbs chapter 13 and verse number 22. Look at Proverbs 13, verse number 22, talking about an inheritance. Is it wrong to leave an inheritance? No. Because you could read Ecclesiastes chapter number 2 on its face and say, I should never leave an inheritance to my children. That's not what the Bible is saying. The Bible is saying you shouldn't leave it to a fool, amongst other things that I hope I can make clear to you. But look at Proverbs 13, 22. You could look at this as a contradictory idea in the Bible if you don't understand the topic that we're talking about this morning. A good man, so here we see this good man again, leaveth an inheritance to his children's children, and the wealth of, here you see this guy again, the sinner is laid up for the just. The Bible here is saying not something different than Ecclesiastes 2, but it's saying the same thing. It's saying that God is a good man. It's a good thing to leave an inheritance to your children's children, meaning your children got it and they were able to not waste it all, and they were able to pass it on to their children. What does that mean? It means they weren't fools. It means they were wise. But it says the sinner, the person that does this wrong, that heaps up to his own travail, all that good, all that is going to be taken and given to the just. So that person that one generation to make it and one generation to lose it, that's just God taking it away from the fool and giving it to the wise. That's what it's saying. They're both saying the same thing. The good man and the sinner, both are wealthy, but for the just, look at verse number 21, or look at the verse of the week of Ecclesiastes 2. It says, for the just, there is a man whose labor is in wisdom and in knowledge and in equity. Yet to a man that hath not labored therein. Labored therein, what does that mean? What does therein mean? It means in wisdom, in knowledge, and in equity. He shall leave it for his portion. See, the man in Ecclesiastes chapter number 2, if your goal is for yourself, is to heap to yourself, he's saying you're going to leave it to others anyway, and they're not going to have the same wisdom as you, because your whole goal in your life was just for yourself, not for anyone else. But the Ecclesiastes chapter number 2 man, look, he's saying, you're going to heap to yourself, your focus is on yourself, and you're just going to raise a bunch of fools. Why? Because your focus was completely on yourself. Right. He's saying in Ecclesiastes chapter number 2, for that man that just heaps to himself, heaps to his own heart, making himself great, it's better to not leave anything, because what's the point? That's what he's saying in Ecclesiastes chapter number 2. He's not saying don't leave an inheritance. He's saying don't be so focused on yourself you raise fools, is what he's actually saying. So the key of is labor good or is labor bad is the focus of the labor. That's the key. In Ecclesiastes chapter number 2, the focus was him and him alone. But in Ecclesiastes chapter number 5, we see it matches 1 Kings chapter number 3, where Solomon had the right heart, and the focus was what? The focus was other people. That is the difference. The difference is, if you invest in other people, God will bless it. That's what the Bible is telling us here. So really the answer and the application for us, go to Ecclesiastes chapter number 2 and look at verse number 9 again. The application and the answer for us is to use our labor under the sun to invest in other people. Look at verse number 9. This is exactly the wrong answer. So I was great and increased more than all that were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me. See, here's the truth of it. If you invest in nothing but yourself, and this is what Ecclesiastes 2, Solomon did that. This is what it proves to us. You will end up with a bigger pile. You will end up with more for yourself. I mean, it's not hard to understand this. I mean, I heard somebody talk about this a couple months ago in a news article on Chick-fil-A, just a worldly example. Like, why in the world would they be closed on Sunday? I mean, some business person just couldn't understand this. Like, what a stupid decision. What a stupid decision to be closed on Sunday, because basically they're just taking 1/7 of their income and just throwing it out the window for no reason at all. And I'm not saying that they're investing in other people necessarily, but the point is, if all they did was focus on themselves and their bottom line, they could make more money. And if all you did was focus on making yourself great, making yourself things, building your business, building all these things, and you thought about nothing but that, you will probably succeed in the worldly sense of that success. You'll end up with a bigger pile just investing in yourself. I think about, just the ministry. And by the way, I'm not the only one in the ministry. You're in the ministry too. I think about the ministry, and many times, even recently I just said this, but many times I've told the kids, look, I have no shortage of things to do. I have no shortage of to-do list things I want to do, things I want to, whether it be build or fix or whatever. I have no shortage on my list, but many times there will be situations in the ministry where I just tell whatever kid I'm with or whatever, it's like, we're just investing in people today. That's it. Today we just, something comes up and we have to go do something for the ministry, for someone in the church, whatever. We're just investing in people today. That's it. But that's the difference between the Ecclesiastes 2 man and the Ecclesiastes 5 man. So, how do you invest in people? Because I'm not the only one in the ministry. You all should be in the ministry too. You should all have your own personal ministry as, you move forward in your Christian life. But a good example is soul winning, is investing in people. You're going out soul winning, and you are literally giving time and labor to people you don't even know, to people you've never even met. Don't you think that the time that you spend soul winning, if you just added up all those hours and you went and you just got some part-time job and you did that instead, don't you think you could make more money? Of course you could. Soul winning doesn't pay anything. Many times you go out soul winning, and as far as we can see on the surface, there's no fruit at all. But investing in people is the difference between these two philosophies. Even just like being friendly is investing in people. Even just being friendly to visitors that come into the church, being a friendly church where people will, introduce themselves. Or, guess what though? If a visitor comes in and comes in here, it's easier to just hang out with my friends. It's easier to just stay within my circle. It's a harder thing to break outside of that comfort zone and go and introduce yourself and talk to new people and just meet people. But look, it's something that it's easier to invest in yourself in that case. Just helping other people. But the Ecclesiastes chapter number 5 man is a man that invests in the things that God wants him invested in. And that's why God blesses that as he chooses. But you see, turn to Luke chapter number 6. You see, people don't invest in other people because the return is not obvious to them. When people think about going and spending more time working or making more money or whatever it is, that return is obvious. You can see it. It's a number. It's out there. When you think about investing in other people, that return, it's not obvious. It's hard to see. Look at Luke chapter number 6, and the Bible gives us an extreme example here in Luke chapter number 6. Look at verse number 35. The Bible says, this is why people generally don't invest in other people. Because the return is obvious. If I go do something for myself, I know I will get that thing done. I know that that will be better. I know that, even if you're talking about spending your time helping somebody else when you have things to fix yourself or whatever. If I go out and do these chores at my house today, these things will be done, these things will be fixed. If I go out and I do these things for other people, these things aren't going to be done. I don't know what's going to come out of that. Look at Luke 6:35. The Bible says, "But love ye your enemies and do good." And look at this, "and lend, hoping for nothing again. And your reward shall be great, and ye shall be the children of the highest. For he is kind unto the unthankful and to the evil." God is saying that God's kind to, he gives this extreme example of just even your personal enemies. You should be kind to. But you should lend, you should do these things. This is one of those things that would make no sense if the Bible didn't say it. This is like a purely Christian teaching right here. The Bible is saying lend to people that even hate you and don't hope for anything back. Had the Bible not said that, who would even think about this? Look, it's an extreme example. Your personal enemies. You're just I'm supposed to help my personal enemies and hope for nothing back? Look, you need to remember this in your Christian lives. This is what investing in other people is all about. Many times when you invest even in your friends, you will get nothing back. But you should hope for nothing back. And I've been asked so many times, because there are people that have been part of this ministry that I have personally helped and helped as part of this ministry that don't like me today. That are people that are against me and say, bad things about me or whatever. And I've been asked so many times. It's one of the most common things that I've been asked, in private, where, people see somebody doing something or saying something bad about me or this church or whatever, and they're like, well, do you regret that you did those good things for them? And I'm not saying that there wasn't a fleshly part of me that at one time maybe had that thought, but ultimately, no. Why? Because I didn't help them because they were good. I didn't help them because they were good. As a matter of fact, you'll help friends, but you'll also help people that are not doing the right thing. And as a matter of fact, many times people that need help, they need help because they're not good. They need help for that very reason. I didn't invest in people. I didn't invest in people because I thought that they could give me something. Rarely would I ever think that. Because many times the reason people need you to invest in them is because they can't give anyone anything, including themselves. So we should hope for nothing in return. So the answer is should you ever regret helping somebody? Have you ever had a situation in your life where you helped somebody and then it turned out that they were not a great person, or they even turned against you or somebody that you know or whatever? Look, you shouldn't ever regret helping that person. Because you didn't help them because they were good. You didn't help them because they would give you something. You should hope for nothing in return. Invest in people. Look, you should invest in people. You should invest labor in people because you like doing it. And ultimately, I like investing in people. I do like it. It gives me joy. Turn back to Ecclesiastes chapter number 5. Exactly what God says that it will give me. Go back to Ecclesiastes chapter number 5. You should like helping people too. You should like You should enjoy investing in other people. If there is a situation where you have to choose between doing something for yourself or somebody else needs you to invest in them in that moment, you should want to invest in that person. For two reasons. The first one is verse number 20 of Ecclesiastes chapter. The first reason is that God blesses it, as he says in Ecclesiastes 5. The second reason is in Ecclesiastes 5:20, for he shall not much remember the days of his life. Why? Why will this guy not be sitting back and lamenting and travailing about his life? Because God hath answered him in the joy of his heart. First of all, God blesses investing in other people. And the man who invests in other people, he won't care so much what others do or don't do with that investment, because God gives him joy in his heart for it. He looks back on his life. So if you look at a situation where you've helped someone in the past, was it a good thing that you did for them, or was it not a good thing? If you did something good for someone or to someone, whether they took that and did bad or good with it, it still gives you joy. Well, I did what I could. Well, I invested in that person, and it's up to them what they do with that investment. And look, you will never be that guy. This is the key right here of the sermon. You will never be that guy or that gal that looks back on your life and says it was all vanity and vexation of spirit. Because is there anything worse than that? Is there anything worse than somebody that gets to the end of their life? Think about this for a second. A parent that gets to the end of their life and is on their deathbed and says, I was a terrible parent. I was a terrible husband. I was a terrible wife. And you know what there is that you can do about that? Nothing at that point. So it's not something that is a small thing to get wrong here. I mean, the Ecclesiastes 2 man, Solomon, how he actually lived his life, he didn't even invest in his own children. He heaped up all these things to himself, and he invested nothing in his children. And at least he wrote these things down for us so we don't make the same mistake. You see, because once you've been a horrible parent for your whole life, and it's done at that point, and you're about to leave this earth, and that's what he talks about. There's something that happens to the wise and to the fool. He's talking about dying. He's at the end of his life. He's saying, I'm looking back on the whole thing, and it's all vexation. There's nothing you can do about the past. So he's saying, don't do that. So the difference between being vexed about your whole life or being joyful about your whole life. You're so joyful about your whole life that you're just like, you don't even look back on it because it just gives you joy. I mean, the difference is who you focused your life on. And for a husband and father, it's really easy. You should be focusing on your family. You should be focusing on your children. You should be focusing on, this is the point of our Bible family, so we can focus the right energy on our wives and our children and making sure everyone's taken care of spiritually, physically, the whole thing. And guess what? If we pour that focus into other people, we won't raise a bunch of fools. We'll give an inheritance to our children's children, because our children will actually not be fools and will be wise as well, and they'll leave an inheritance to their children's children. So everyone here has had someone invest in them. And that's really the key here. Anyone that has ever accomplished anything or gotten anywhere in their life, spiritually and even physically, someone invested in them. So we need to get over ourselves this morning. We need to get over ourselves, and we need to start thinking about investing in other people. Where we put our labor. It's not saying that, and guess what? God's going to bless that. God's going to bless that, and you're not going to be poor. It's not a choice. God doesn't even give this choice, like you have to be a pauper, or, you can just heap onto yourself a bunch of wealth. God's like, all these people were wealthy. This guy's miserable. This guy's not. And the difference is where they put their energy. One invested in others, and the other invested just in himself. And that's what Solomon is saying. It's not about what comes from your labor. It's not about that at all. It's about where your labor is focused. Start investing in other people. Make a goal in your life to invest in other people, because guess what? People are investing in you. It only makes sense. Let's bow our heads and have a word of prayer.